I sat in the Apex Solutions conference room on the 23rd floor of our Charlotte headquarters, staring out at the skyline that had framed my life for 15 years. The glass walls reflected the late afternoon sun, casting jagged streaks of light across the polished mahogany table. It was a room I'd fought in, won in, and damn near bled for. Every deal, every late night, every algorithm tweak that kept Apex ahead of the pack. Now it felt like a courtroom and I was the one on trial. Lillian Grayson sat across from me, her silver hair pulled tight into a bun that matched the severity of her tailored blazer. She was Apex's CEO, a woman who could smile while she gutted you and make it feel like a favor. Next to her was Carolyn Bates, HR director, clutching a manila folder like it was a shield. Her eyes darted between me and the papers, avoiding the weight of what was coming. The air hummed with the low buzz of the HVAC, but it couldn't mask the tension pressing down on us. Rachel, Lillian started, her voice smooth as marble, you've been a cornerstone here. 15 years is no small feat, she paused, letting the flattery hang like bait. I didn't bite. But the board's decided to restructure. Your position, Chief Data Officer, it's being phased out. Effective immediately. The words hit like a punch I'd seen coming but couldn't dodge. I leaned back in the leather chair, the creak of it louder than my thoughts. 15 years distilled into a single sentence. I'd built the data division from a skeleton crew to a juggernaut, coded the algorithms that turned Apex into a Fortune 500 darling. And now they were cutting me loose like dead weight. Carolyn slid the folder across the table, her fingers trembling slightly. This is your severance package, she said, her tone softer, almost apologetic. It's generous, Rachel. 6 months' salary, full benefits through the end of the year, and a non-disclosure clause. We just need your signature. I didn't touch it. The folder sat there, a pristine little tombstone for my career. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I kept my face still, my hands folded in my lap. Calm. Always calm. That's how I'd survived here, through the late-night boardroom ambushes, the whispers of layoffs, the endless jockeying for power. I'd learned to bury the rage, to let it simmer until I could use it. Why now? I asked, my voice steady, cutting through the silence. I looked straight at Lillian, searching for the crack in her composure. There had to be more to this. Apex didn't just shed a C-suite exec without a play in mind. Lillian's lips tightened just for a fraction of a second. It's a strategic shift, she said, leaning forward slightly. The industry's moving faster than ever. We need agility, new blood. You've done incredible work, Rachel, but the board wants a fresh perspective. Bullshit. I'd heard the jargon before. Restructuring, agility, fresh perspective. It was the corporate equivalent of, it's not you, it's me. But I'd been around long enough to know the game. This wasn't about my performance. It was about control. Someone wanted my seat, or what I'd built. My algorithm, the one I'd poured years into perfecting, the one that predicted market shifts with uncanny precision. It was the golden goose. And I'd bet my severance they were planning to keep it. I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. Strategic shift, I echoed, tasting the lie in the words. Well, I appreciate the heads up. My tone was dry, but I kept the edge out of it. No point in tipping my hand yet. Carolyn shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. We've scheduled your exit interview for Friday, she said, glancing at Lillian for approval. It'll give us time to wrap up any loose ends. And of course, we'll need your access codes and company devices returned. Friday. 3 days away. They were moving fast, too fast. I forced a small smile, the kind I'd mastered in 100 negotiations. Sure. I'll tie everything up by then. Lillian stood, signaling the end of the execution. You've been a class act, Rachel. We'll miss you around here. She extended a hand, her grip firm and cold when I took it. Carolyn followed with a weaker handshake, muttering something about reaching out if I needed anything. I watched them leave, their heels clicking against the hardwood floor, the door swinging shut behind them with a soft thud. Alone now, I let my gaze drift back to the skyline. The city sprawled out below, towers of glass and steel, a kingdom I'd helped build. And yet here I was, cast out like yesterday's news. The anger was there, coiled tight in my gut, but so was something else. Clarity. They thought they'd won, that I'd take my payout and fade away quietly. They didn't know me at all. I'd spent 15 years climbing their ladder, clawing my way up from a junior analyst to the C-suite. I'd faced down bigger sharks than Lillian Grayson and come out on top. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning. I reached for the severance folder, flipping it open. The numbers stared back at me, 6 figures, a tidy little bribe to disappear. But it wasn't the money that caught my eye. It was the non-disclosure clause, buried on page 3, bolded and underlined. They weren't just letting me go, they were locking me down. What were they so desperate to keep quiet? I closed the folder and stood, smoothing my skirt. The conference room felt smaller now, the air thicker. I walked to the window, pressing a hand against the cool glass. Out there, beyond the gleaming facade of Apex, was a world I could still bend to my will. They'd made their move, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I left the conference room that Tuesday afternoon with the severance folder tucked under my arm, its weight a constant reminder of the blade they'd just slipped between my ribs. The 23rd floor was quiet as I walked back to my office. Too quiet, like the whole building was holding its breath, waiting for me to break. The carpet muffled my steps, but I could feel the eyes of every passing assistant and junior exec tracking me, their whispers already weaving through the halls. Rachel Harper out. After 15 years just like that. My office sat at the end of the corridor, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Charlotte's skyline like a trophy case. I'd earned every inch of this space, every late night, every breakthrough, every time I'd outsmarted the suits upstairs. Now it felt like a museum exhibit, a relic of a life they were dismantling piece by piece. I shut the door behind me, the click of the latch louder than it should have been, and let the silence settle. The desk was still cluttered with the chaos of my last project. Printouts of code, a half-empty coffee mug, a photo of me and the team at last year's gala, all smiles and champagne. I dropped the folder onto the mess and sank into my chair, the leather groaning under me. My hands hovered over the keyboard, muscle memory urging me to log in, to fight back through the only language I'd ever truly mastered, data. But my access would be cut soon enough. They'd made sure of that. I leaned back, staring out at the city. The sun was dipping low, painting the glass towers in shades of orange and gold, a cruelly beautiful contrast to the storm brewing inside me. 15 years and they thought they could erase me with a handshake and a check. Lillian's words echoed in my head. Strategic shift, new blood. Each syllable a polished lie. I'd seen the game before, but never from this side of the table. They weren't just restructuring, they were stealing. My algorithm, my life's work, was the prize, and I'd be damned if I let them have it. The phone on my desk buzzed, snapping me out of the spiral. I glanced at the screen, an email notification, the sender's name obscured by the lock screen. Probably Carolyn with some HR follow-up, another layer of paperwork to bury me in. I unlocked it out of habit, my thumb brushing the sensor, and froze. The email wasn't from Carolyn. It was from Jim Carver, Apex's CEO, addressed to Lillian and a handful of board members. The subject line read, Harper transition, next steps. I shouldn't have seen this. It was a misdirected forward, a careless slip in their perfect plan. My pulse quickened as I opened it, the words blurring for a second before sharpening into focus. Rachel's exit is on track for Friday, Jim wrote. Legals confirmed the algorithm's IP falls under her employment contract, company property. We'll roll it into the Q3 portfolio once she's out. Keep this tight. There was more, talk of stock projections, a new hire to replace me, but that first line was all I needed. They weren't just letting me go, they were stripping me bare, claiming what I'd built as their own. The air in the room thickened, pressing against my chest. I set the phone down, my hands trembling, not with fear but with something hotter, sharper. Rage, yes, but also a strange, cold clarity. They thought they'd won, that I'd sign their NDA and slink away. They didn't know I'd spent years guarding my work like a fortress, documenting every line of code, every late-night epiphany. And they sure as hell didn't know about the improvements I'd made off the clock, the ones I'd never uploaded to their servers. I grabbed my personal phone from my purse, the one they couldn't touch, and opened my texts. Tom Randall's name was near the top, a contact I'd kept warm for years. Pinnacle Technologies VP of Innovation, a shark in his own right. My fingers hovered over the screen, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about revenge. Hey, I typed, keeping it casual. Apex pulled the plug on me today. Friday's my last day. You still interested in that coffee? I hit send, my heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. Tom had been sniffing around my work for months, dropping hints about Pinnacle's hunger for a game changer. If I played this right, I could turn their betrayal into my triumph. The reply came fast. Damn Rachel. Their loss. Coffee's on me. Tomorrow 10 a.m. I could almost hear his grin through the screen, the gears already turning in his head. I typed back a quick, "See you then," then leaned back, letting the plan take shape. The algorithm wasn't theirs, not yet. I'd patented the upgrades last year through a shell LC, a paranoid little safeguard I'd set up after a close call with a competitor. Apex didn't know, and that was my edge. I stood and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the glass again. The city glowed below, a battlefield I'd conquered once and could conquer again. They'd pushed me out, but I wasn't gone. Not yet. The rage was still there, simmering, but now it had a purpose. Lillian and Jim thought they'd buried me. They'd see soon enough. I wasn't the type to stay down. My eyes flicked to the desk, to the severance folder sitting like a taunt. It's signature. I'd play their game, wear the mask of resignation they expected. But behind it, I was already moving, already plotting. Friday wasn't the end. It was the spark. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against my bedroom window, a steady drumbeat that matched the restless churn in my gut. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying Jim Carver's email like a broken record. Asterisk, legals confirmed the algorithm's IP falls under her employment contract, company property. Asterisk, the arrogance of it burned, but the rain outside felt like a quiet ally, washing the city clean for the fight I was about to start. I pulled on a dark blazer and slacks, the armor of a woman who'd spent years in the trenches, and grabbed my umbrella. Tom Randall was waiting, and I had a war to wage. By 10 a.m. I was sitting across from him in a corner booth at the Oak Room, a sleek little spot in Raleigh where the power players liked to hide behind craft cocktails and overpriced steak. The place smelled of leather and smoked oak, the kind of scent that clung to deals made in hushed tones. Rain streaked the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the world outside into a gray haze, while inside the dim lighting cast long shadows across the table. My coffee sat untouched, steam curling up in lazy spirals as I studied Tom. He leaned back in the booth, one arm draped over the leather, his navy suit crisp despite the weather. He had the easy grin of a man who'd never lost a bet he couldn't afford, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, told me he knew the stakes. "So," he said, swirling the ice in his bourbon, "Apex finally showed their hand. I'm guessing it wasn't pretty." I let out a dry laugh, resting my elbows on the table. Pretty's not the word I'd use. They're restructuring me out, Friday's my last day. Lillian Grayson delivered the news like she was doing me a favor, and Carolyn Bates just sat there clutching her HR script. But that's not the half of it. I paused, letting the weight settle between us. They're after my algorithm, claiming it as company property. Tom's grin faded, replaced by a flicker of something harder. He set the glass down, the clink sharp against the wood. "Your algorithm? The one that's been keeping Apex's stock afloat? That's ballsy even for them." "Ballsy and stupid," I said, my voice low but steady. "They think it's theirs because I built it on their dime. But I've got an ace up my sleeve." I leaned in, dropping my tone further. "The upgrades, the real game changers, I patented last year. Off their servers through a shell LLC. They don't know." His eyebrows shot up, and for a moment he just stared at me, processing. Then the grin crept back, wider this time, edged with something like admiration. "You're a damn genius, Rachel. They're walking into a trap they don't even see." I nodded, feeling the first real spark of triumph ignite in my chest. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was enough to cut through the fog of betrayal that had hung over me since yesterday. "That's why I'm here, Tom. I'm not just looking for a soft landing at Pinnacle. I want to bury Apex. And I need your help to do it." He leaned forward now, mirroring my posture, his voice dropping to match mine. "You've got my attention. What's the play?" I took a breath, the plan crystallizing as I spoke. "I sign their severance deal tomorrow. Play the good soldier, keep them thinking I'm out of the fight. Meanwhile, I bring the patent to Pinnacle. You announce it Monday right after my exit and make it loud. Apex won't know what hit them until it's too late." Tom tapped a finger against his glass, his mind already running the angles. "Monday's tight but doable. We'd need legal to greenlight the patent transfer fast. My team can handle that. What about your team at Apex? They're loyal to you, not Carver." "Exactly," I said, my pulse quickening. "Ethan Morales, my lead engineer, he's been with me since the beginning. If I move, he'll follow and half the data crew will too. Apex'll be left scrambling. He whistled low, shaking his head. You're not just burying them, Rachel. You're burning the damn house down. He paused, studying me. You sure about this? Once we pull the trigger, there's no going back. Apex'll come after you, legal, PR, whatever they've got. The question hung there, heavy as the rain outside. I thought of Lillian's cold handshake, Jim's smug email, the years I'd poured into a company that thought it could discard me like a used tissue. I thought of the algorithm, my algorithm, slipping into their hands, my legacy rewritten as their triumph. And then I thought of the patent, my secret weapon locked away where they couldn't touch it. The anger was still there, coiled tight, but now it had a shape, a direction. I'm sure, I said, meeting his gaze. They drew first blood. I'm just finishing the job. Tom nodded, decisive like a general locking in a battle plan. All right then. I'll get the ball rolling with Pinnacle's board today. You'll need to meet our CEO Victor Lang tomorrow, he's in town for a summit. If he signs off, we're gold. Can you be here by noon? Noon works, I said, already mapping the drive back from Charlotte. I'll bring the patent docs. Everything's clean and ready. Good. He raised his glass, a toast to the chaos we were about to unleash. To new beginnings, Rachel. And to sticking it to the bastards who deserve it. I lifted my coffee, clinking it against his bourbon. To new beginnings, I echoed, the words tasting like victory, or at least the promise of it. The rain drummed harder against the windows, a fitting soundtrack to the storm I was brewing. For the first time since Lillian's ambush, I felt steady, like the ground wasn't slipping out from under me. Apex thought they'd won, but they'd underestimated me. They all had. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. Small talk about Pinnacle's pipeline, Tom's pitch for my new role as Chief Innovation Officer. But my mind was elsewhere, spinning through the next steps, the risks, the cracks in my own resolve. Walking away from Apex was one thing, torching it was another. I'd spent 15 years building something there, and now I was tearing it down with my own hands. Was it justice or just revenge? The line felt blurry, and I hated how much that gnawed at me. As we stepped outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, the air thick with the scent of wet asphalt. Tom offered a quick handshake, his grip firm and sure. Tomorrow noon, he said. Don't be late. I won't, I replied, watching him disappear into the gray. I stood there for a moment, umbrella dangling at my side, letting the damp seep into my bones. The triumph was still there, flickering, but so was the weight, the cost of what I was about to do. Apex wasn't just a job. It was my life, my identity. And now I was betting it all on a single roll of the dice. I turned toward my car, the city's hum rising around me. Friday was 2 days away, and Monday loomed like a guillotine. I'd accepted the dismissal with a calm I didn't feel, but outmaneuvering Apex? That was personal. And as I slid into the driver's seat, rain streaking the windshield, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just fighting for my algorithm. I was fighting for me. I drove back to Charlotte under a sky that couldn't decide whether to clear or drown me again, the wipers flicking intermittently across the windshield. The meeting with Tom had left me buzzing, half adrenaline, half dread, but the road ahead felt like a tightrope stretched between what I'd lost and what I might still win. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the drizzle had stopped, leaving the air heavy and the pavement slick. My house loomed dark and quiet, a brick colonial I'd bought after my promotion to Chief Data Officer 5 years ago. It used to feel like a victory. Now it was just a place to plan my next move. Thursday morning came too fast. I stood in my office at Apex, the corner suite that had been my war room for 15 years, and started packing. The severance folder sat unopened on the desk, a silent taunt I hadn't touched since Tuesday. Around me, the space was a graveyard of my tenure. Files stacked in uneven piles, a dead plant I'd never watered, the framed photo of me and Ethan Morales grinning at some long-forgotten conference. I moved methodically, shoving papers into a banker's box, my hands steady even as my mind raced. Noon in Raleigh was hours away, but every tick of the clock felt like a countdown to something irreversible. The door creaked open behind me, and I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Lillian Grayson's perfume, and sharp, expensive floral, hit me first, followed by the deliberate click of her heels against the hardwood. I kept my back to her, sliding a stack of notebooks into the box, my fingers tightening around the edges. Rachel, she said, her voice carrying that same polished edge from the conference room. I thought I'd check in. See how you're holding up. I straightened, turning slowly to face her. She stood framed in the doorway, arms crossed, her silver bun catching the light from the window. The office felt smaller with her in it, the air thicker like the walls were closing in. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the half-packed chaos, the barren desk, before settling on me. There was no warmth there, just a cool appraisal, like she was sizing up a loose end she hadn't quite tied off. "I'm fine, Lillian," I said, keeping my tone even, almost light. "Just tying up those loose ends like Carolyn asked." I gestured vaguely at the box, forcing a tight smile. 15 years takes a while to pack. She stepped inside, her heels marking a slow rhythm as she approached the desk. "It's a shame, really. You've been such a fixture here." She picked up the photo of me and Ethan, studying it for a moment before setting it down with a faint clink. "But change is inevitable, isn't it? Apex has to keep moving forward." There it was again, that corporate doublespeak she wielded like a blade. I watched her, searching for the tell, the twitch of her lip, the flicker in her gaze, that might betray what she knew. Did she suspect I'd seen Jim's email? Did she guess I was already steps ahead, the patent locked in my safe at home, the meeting with Pinnacle set? My pulse thudded in my ears, but I kept my face still, my hands resting casually on the box. "Forward's a funny word," I said, tilting my head slightly. "Depends on who's steering the ship, doesn't it?" Her smile tightened just a fraction, but it was enough. She leaned against the desk, crossing one ankle over the other, the picture of control. "The board's steering now, Rachel. And Jim. They've got a vision. Your algorithm, it's going to take us places. You should be proud of that." My stomach twisted, a hot spike of anger flaring behind my ribs. There it was, out in the open, my algorithm, their prize, dangling like a carrot she thought I'd chase. I wanted to laugh, to tell her they'd never touch it, that I'd already turned their greed into my weapon. But I swallowed it down, letting the silence stretch, my eyes locked on hers. "I am proud," I said finally, my voice low, deliberate. "More than you know." She held my gaze for a beat too long, like she was testing the weight of my words, then straightened, smoothing her blazer. "Good. Then we're on the same page. I'll let you finish up here. Carolyn will need your badge by end of day tomorrow." She turned to go but paused at the door, glancing back over her shoulder. "Take care, Rachel. You've earned it." The door clicked shut behind her, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. The room felt suffocating now, the walls pressing in with the echoes of her words. Asterisk your algorithm, their vision. Asterisk she didn't know. None of them did. And that ignorance was my power. I sank into my chair, staring at the box, the photo of Ethan still perched on the desk where she'd left it. He'd been with me through every late night, every impossible deadline. If I pulled this off, he'd follow me to Pinnacle, I was sure of it. But the thought of dragging him into this mess, of burning the bridge we'd built together at Apex, gnawed at me. Was I fighting for justice or just feeding my own pride? The line kept blurring, and I hated how it made my chest ache. The clock on the wall read 10:15. I had to move. I grabbed my purse, the patent paperwork already tucked inside, and slung it over my shoulder. The box could wait. Lillian wouldn't be back today and I'd be gone tomorrow. I took one last look at the office, the skyline framed in gold beyond the glass, and felt a strange jolt of clarity. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. Mine, my work, my legacy. Apex had drawn the battle lines and I was done playing their game. The drive to Raleigh blurred past in a haze of asphalt and nerves. By noon, I was sitting in Pinnacle's headquarters, a gleaming tower of steel and ambition that dwarfed Apex's aging Charlotte digs. The lobby was all sharp angles and polished marble, the air humming with the quiet confidence of a company on the rise. Tom met me at the elevators, his grin as sharp as ever, and led me up to the 30th floor where Victor Lang waited. Victor's office was a study in power, dark wood floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that looked like it could double as a war table. He stood as we entered, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a handshake that could crush stone. His gray eyes locked on mine, assessing, and I felt the weight of the moment settle like a storm cloud. "Rachel Harper," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Tom says you're bringing us something big. Let's hear it." I set my bag on the table, pulling out the patent docs with hands that didn't shake even though my heart was hammering. "This is it," I said, sliding the papers across to him. "Algorithm upgrades I patented last year. outside Apex's reach. It's the edge they've been riding on and they don't even know I own it. Victor scanned the first page, his brow furrowing as he flipped to the next. Tom hovered at my side, silent but coiled like a spring ready to snap. The room was quiet except for the faint rustle of paper and the distant hum of the city below. I could feel the tension building, my future hanging on this one man's verdict. He looked up finally, leaning back in his chair. You're telling me Apex thinks this is theirs and you've got the legal proof it's not? Exactly, I said, meeting his gaze. I built it, I protected it, and now I'm offering it to Pinnacle, along with myself as Chief Innovation Officer. Victor's lips twitched, not quite a smile but close. And what's the catch? Apex won't let this go quietly. There's no catch, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. They'll fight, sure. But they've got no claim and I've got the paperwork to prove it. By the time they figure it out, Pinnacle can have it locked down and announced. Their loss, your gain. He studied me for a long moment, then glanced at Tom. She's a hell of a find, isn't she? Told you, Tom said, clapping me on the shoulder. Rachel's not just a hire, she's a damn coup. Victor nodded, sliding the papers back to me. All right, Rachel. You've got a deal. Sign with us tomorrow and we'll roll this out Monday. Apex won't know what hit them. The words sank in slow, then fast, a rush of triumph flooding through me like a shot of adrenaline. I'd done it, outmaneuvered Apex, turned their betrayal into my leverage. My hands tingled as I tucked the papers back into my bag, the weight of the wind settling in my bones. But beneath it there was something else. A flicker of unease, a whisper of what this victory might cost. As I left Victor's office, Tom trailing behind with promises of contracts by morning, I glanced out at Raleigh's skyline. It glittered in the afternoon sun, a new battlefield I'd just claimed. I'd won this round, no question. But the war wasn't over, not yet. And as I stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft hiss, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just lit a fuse I couldn't put out. I woke up Friday morning to a stillness that felt unnatural, the kind of quiet that presses in before a storm breaks. My bedroom window framed a gray Charlotte sky, the clouds low and heavy, mirroring the weight in my chest. Today was my last day at Apex Solutions, 15 years boxed up and handed over like a forgotten lease. But it was also the day I'd sign with Pinnacle Technologies, the day I'd turn their betrayal into my triumph. The severance folder sat on my nightstand, unopened since Lillian's visit yesterday, its crisp edges taunting me with the life I was leaving behind. I didn't touch it. Not yet. The drive to Apex felt longer than usual, the city's hum muted under the overcast sky. My office building loomed ahead, a glass and steel monolith I'd once seen as a kingdom but now felt like a mausoleum. I parked in my usual spot, third row near the executive entrance, and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white against the leather. The rain started then, a soft patter against the windshield, and I let it steady me. This wasn't the end, it was the pivot. I grabbed my bag, the patent papers tucked inside like a loaded gun, and stepped out into the drizzle. The 23rd floor was a ghost town when I arrived. My office door stood ajar, the banker's box still half-packed where I'd left it. The air smelled faintly of Lillian's perfume, a lingering trace of her Thursday ambush, but the space was mine again, for a few hours at least. I dropped my bag on the desk and started moving faster, shoving files and notebooks into the box with a rhythm that kept my hands busy and my mind sharp. The photo of me and Ethan Morales caught my eye again, and I paused, tracing the frame with my thumb. He'd be here soon. I'd texted him last night, meet me at 10. We need to talk. And I knew he'd show. Loyalty ran deep with him, deeper than Apex deserved. The clock hit 9:45 when the door swung open, and there he was, Ethan, all 6 feet of him, his dark hair mussed from the rain, his tie slightly crooked like always. He stood there, hands in his pockets, his brown eyes scanning the wreckage of my office before landing on me. The tension in his jaw told me he'd heard the whispers, but the way he lingered in the doorway said he wasn't sure what came next. Jesus, Rachel, he said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind him. They really did it, huh? Kicked you out like it's nothing. I leaned against the desk, crossing my arms. Not kicked out, Ethan. Restructured. That's the official line anyway. My voice was dry but steady. Lillian delivered the news Tuesday, all smiles and corporate bullshit. Today's my last day. He shook his head, running a hand through his damp hair. 15 years and they pull this? You built this place. The algorithm, hell, that's your blood in the code. What's their play? I studied him for a beat, weighing how much to tell him now. Ethan had been my shadow for a decade. My lead engineer, my sounding board, the guy who debugged my wildest ideas at 3 a.m. over cold pizza. He deserved the truth, but I needed him to see the bigger picture first. I straightened, stepping closer, my voice dropping low. There plays the algorithm, I said. I saw an email from Jim Carver. Misdirected dumb luck. They're claiming it as company property under my contract. Planning to roll it into Q3 once I'm gone. His eyes widened, then narrowed, a flash of anger cutting through the shock. That's theft. You wrote every damn line of that thing. They can't, they think they can, I cut in, holding his gaze. But they're wrong. The upgrades, the real juice I patented last year, off their servers. They don't own it. I do. The room went quiet, the rain's soft tattoo against the windows the only sound. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed, his mind racing to catch up. I could see the gears turning, the disbelief giving way to something sharper. Admiration maybe, or just the raw edge of understanding. You patented it? He said finally, his voice a mix of awe and incredulity. When? How? Last spring, I said, leaning back against the desk again. After that scare with Helix trying to poach our data. Set up a shell LLC, kept it quiet. Paranoid move at the time, but it's my lifeline now. He let out a low whistle, pacing a tight circle in front of me. So they kick you out, think they've got the prize, and you've already got it locked down. Damn Rachel, that's brilliant. I allowed myself a small smile, the first crack in the armor I'd worn all week. Brilliant's only half the story. I'm taking it to Pinnacle Technologies. Signed with them this morning. Chief Innovation Officer. They're announcing the patent Monday, loud and public. Apex'll be scrambling by lunch. Ethan stopped pacing, his hands dropping to his sides. He stared at me and I saw it hit him. The scope of it, the sheer audacity. You're not just leaving, he said slowly. You're burning the bridge and salting the earth. Something like that, I said, my smile fading. They drew first blood, Ethan. I'm just making sure they bleed too. He nodded, but there was a flicker in his eyes. Something hesitant, unguarded. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And what about us? The team? You know, half the data crew would follow you anywhere. Me included. There it was, the question I'd been dreading, the one that made my chest tighten with something I couldn't name. I'd known he'd ask, known he'd offer, but hearing it out loud hit harder than I'd expected. Ethan wasn't just a colleague. He was family, the kind you don't choose but end up with anyway. And now I was asking him to jump into the fire with me. I was hoping you'd say that, I said, my voice softer now, almost raw. Pinnacle's got room for you. Lead engineer, same as here, but with equity this time. The others too if they want in. But it's a risk, Ethan. Apex won't take this lying down. Legal peer, they'll hit back hard. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. I'm not scared of them. Neither are you, or you wouldn't be doing this. I'm in, Rachel. Been with you this long. Might as well see it through. Relief washed over me, sharp and sudden, like a breath I hadn't known I was holding. I reached out, clapping him on the shoulder, the gesture awkward but real. Good. Meet me in Raleigh Monday, 9 a.m. Pinnacle's HQ. I'll send the details tonight. He grinned, the tension easing from his face. Monday it is. Guess I'd better start packing too. We stood there for a moment, the rain tapping its steady rhythm, the office around us a shell of what it had been. I glanced at the box, the photo still perched on the desk, and felt a pang of loss maybe, or just the weight of what I was asking him to leave behind. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. And that made it heavier but also lighter somehow, like the burden had split in two. Take care of yourself today, I said, grabbing my bag. Carolyn's coming for my badge at 5. After that I'm gone. He nodded, stepping back toward the door. See you on the other side, boss. The door clicked shut behind him and I was alone again, the silence thicker now, pressing against my skin. I finished packing, tossing the last of the files into the box, leaving the dead plant and the coffee mug behind. The photo of me and Ethan went into my bag, a quiet promise to carry forward. By 4:55 I was ready, the severance folder signed and waiting on the desk, my badge next to it like a discarded skin. Carolyn showed up right on time, her knock timid, her smile forced. She took the badge and the folder, muttering something about processing, but I barely heard her. My eyes were on the skyline beyond the glass, the city gray and blurred under the rain. This was it, 15 years severed in a heartbeat. But as she left, the weight didn't crush me like I'd feared. It lifted just enough, replaced by a flicker of something fierce. Triumph, maybe, or the promise of it. I drove to Raleigh that evening, the rain following me like a shadow. Pinnacle's headquarters rose against the dusk, a sleek tower of steel and glass that gleamed even in the gloom. I parked and stepped out, the air cool and damp against my face. Tomorrow was Saturday, but I'd signed the contract remotely that morning. Chief Innovation Officer, effective immediately. Monday the world would know. Apex would reel and I'd stand taller. I walked toward the building, my reflection rippling in the wet pavement. The triumph was there, burning bright, but so was the cost. The years I'd given Apex, the team I was pulling into this storm. Justice or revenge? The line was still blurry and it twisted in my gut. But as I looked up at Pinnacle's glowing facade, I knew one thing. I'd outmaneuvered them. And that was enough for now. I stood in the lobby of Pinnacle Technologies that Monday morning, the air buzzing with a quiet intensity that matched the storm brewing 30 miles away in Charlotte. The sleek marble floors gleamed under recessed lights, and the walls, sharp panes of glass, reflected the Raleigh skyline, a city waking up to the chaos I'd just unleashed. My new badge hung heavy around my neck, the title Chief Innovation Officer etched in crisp black letters. It should have felt like a crown, but it sat more like a collar, tethering me to a war I'd started but couldn't yet see the end of. Ethan was due any minute, the rest of the team trickling in behind him, but my mind was already across town, imagining the Apex boardroom erupting as Pinnacle's press release hit the wires. The announcement had gone live at 8 a.m. sharp, Tom's doing with Victor's blessing. I'd watched it unfold from my hotel room, the words blazing across my laptop screen. Pinnacle Technologies acquires groundbreaking algorithm patent, welcomes Rachel Harper as Chief Innovation Officer. Clean, precise, devastating. No mention of Apex by name, but the subtext screamed it. My algorithm, my move, their loss. I'd felt the triumph then, a hot rush that burned away the ache of Friday's farewell. But now, standing here, the satisfaction was tinged with something sharper. Anticipation, maybe, or dread. Apex wouldn't roll over. Not with Jim Carver at the helm and Lillian Grayson whispering in his ear. The elevator doors slid open behind me and Ethan stepped out, his dark hair still damp from the morning drizzle, his grin wide but edged with nerves. He carried a battered messenger bag slung over one shoulder, the same one he'd hauled to countless Apex all-nighters. Behind him came Sarah Kim and Marcus Tate, my data analysts, my quiet soldiers, both clutching coffee cups and looking like they'd barely slept. They'd signed on last night, lured by the equity offers and the chance to stick it to the machine that'd spit me out. Loyalty or maybe just spite. Either way, they were here. "Morning, boss," Ethan said, clapping me on the shoulder as he stopped beside me. His voice was light, but his eyes flicked around the lobby, taking in the unfamiliar terrain. "You see the headlines yet? TechCrunch is calling it a corporate heist. Apex's stock's already down 3 points. I nodded, my lips twitching into a half-smile despite the knot in my gut. "Good. Let it bleed." The words came out harder than I meant, and I caught Sarah's quick glance at Marcus. A flicker of unease I pretended not to see. They were in, but they weren't blind. This wasn't just a win. It was a detonation, and we were all standing in the blast radius. "Let's get upstairs," I said, turning toward the elevators. "Tom's waiting. We've got work to do." The ride to the 30th floor was silent, the hum of the cables filling the space where words should have been. My team, my asterisk team, not Apex's anymore, stood close, their presence a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. When the doors opened, Tom was there, leaning against the glass wall of the executive suite, his navy suit rumpled like he'd been up all night orchestrating this. His grin was pure predator, teeth bared for the kill. "Rachel," he said, straightening as we stepped out. "You've got Apex by the throat. Jim Carver's been blowing up my phone since 8:05. Didn't even say hello, just started yelling." I hung up on him. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the glass. "Wish I'd heard it. What's the damage?" "Chaos," he said, falling into step beside me as we headed for the conference room. "Their PR team's scrambling, but they've got nothing concrete yet. Legal's probably digging through your contract as we speak." They'll come at us, but Victor's got our lawyers locked and loaded. He glanced at Ethan and the others, nodding. Your crew's here, good. We're briefing the board in an hour. You're up first. The conference room was a stark contrast to Apex's. Less mahogany, more steel, with a long table flanked by screens already flashing Pinnacle's logo. The windows stretched wide, framing Raleigh's skyline in a way that felt like a dare, bigger, bolder, mine to claim. But as I dropped my bag on the table and turned to face my team, the air shifted, thickened. This wasn't just a new job. It was a gauntlet, and I'd dragged them into it. The weight of that pressed against my ribs, heavy as the Charlotte rain I'd left behind. All right, I said, meeting their eyes one by one. Ethan's steady gaze, Sarah's cautious squint, Marcus's quiet intensity. You're here because you chose this. Pinnacle's our ground now, and that patent's our weapon. Apex'll hit back, they've got the cash and the claws, but we've got the edge. Today we dig in. Tomorrow we build. Ethan nodded, leaning back in his chair. They're gonna hate us for this. Lillian's probably shredding your exit paperwork as we speak. Let her, I said, my voice low, firm. She wanted a strategic shift. She's got one. Sarah shifted in her seat, her coffee cup tapping softly against the table. What about the team still at Apex? They're not all jumping ship. Some of them, hell most of them, think we're the bad guys here. The question stung, a needle I hadn't expected. I'd spent the weekend focused on the win, the outmaneuvering, the sweet sting of triumph as Pinnacle's announcement ripped through Apex's smug facade. But Sarah was right. There were faces I'd left behind, coders and analysts who'd toasted me at last year's gala, who'd trusted me to lead them. Now I was the traitor torching their house. Justice or revenge? The line blurred again, and I hated how it made my throat tighten. They'll survive, I said, forcing the words out steady. Apex'll spin it, replace us, move on. We're not the first to jump, won't be the last. But even as I spoke, the doubt gnawed deeper. Had I burned them too, the ones who hadn't seen this coming? The ones who'd stayed? Before anyone could press further, my phone buzzed against the table. A Charlotte number, unknown but familiar in its area code. I froze, my hand hovering over it, every nerve screaming Apex. Tom caught my eye, his grin fading to something harder. Answer it, he said. Let's see what they've got. I hit the button, putting it on speaker, and leaned back, arms crossed. The room went still, my team's eyes locked on the glowing screen. A voice crackled through, low, clipped, unmistakably Lillian Grayson. Rachel, she said, no preliminaries, no warmth. You've made quite a mess this morning. I kept my face blank, my voice colder. Morning, Lillian. I'd say Pinnacle's announcement speaks for itself. What's on your mind? A pause, long enough to hear the rustle of papers, the faint murmur of voices in the background. Her war room, no doubt, the Apex boardroom I could picture down to the last scuff on the table. When she spoke again, her tone was steel wrapped in silk. You think you've won, don't you? Taking your little patent and running to Pinnacle like some scorned child. But you've miscalculated. That algorithm's roots are in Apex systems. Our servers, our time. Legal's already drafting the injunction. You won't enjoy this victory long. My pulse kicked up, but I didn't flinch. I'd known this was coming, had braced for it since the moment I'd seen Jim's email. The patent was mine, airtight, locked down through sleepless nights and a lawyer I'd paid in cash. But Lillian's confidence, that icy certainty, dug into me like a splinter. What did she have? Loophole? A lie they could sell to a judge. I haven't miscalculated anything, I said, my voice steady despite the heat climbing my spine. That patent's mine, filed off your grid, clean as they come. You can draft what you want, but you've got no claim. Checkmate, Lillian. She laughed, a soft, cutting sound that made my skin crawl. Checkmate? Oh, Rachel, you're still playing the small game. Enjoy your moment. We'll talk soon. The line went dead and the room exhaled with me. Ethan swore under his breath, Sarah's coffee cup stilled, and Marcus just stared, his jaw tight. Tom leaned forward, elbows on the table, his eyes glinting with something between worry and thrill. She's bluffing, he said, though it sounded more like a question. Legal's got us covered. Victor triple-checked it. Maybe, I said, my mind already racing through the possibilities. Apex's servers, their time, had I missed something? A backup I'd forgotten, a trace they could twist? The triumph from an hour ago was slipping, replaced by a pressure that squeezed my chest like a vice. I'd outmaneuvered them, yes, but at what cost? If they tied this up in court, dragged it out, Pinnacle could balk. Victor could cut me loose, my team with me. I stood, pacing to the window, the skyline blurring into streaks of gray and steel. Below, Raleigh hummed on, oblivious to the storm I'd kicked up. My reflection stared back, sharp blazer, sharper eyes, but beneath it I felt the cracks. The satisfaction of Ethan and the team joining me, the thrill of sticking it to Apex was real, but so was the weight. I'd wanted justice, had told myself this was about protecting what was mine. But standing here, Lillian's voice still echoing, I wondered if I'd traded one cage for another. Rachel. Ethan's voice pulled me back, low and steady. You could. I turned, forcing a nod. Yeah. Just thinking. They're not done, we're not done. Let's get to work. But as I sat back down, the pressure didn't lift. It grew, a shadow I couldn't outrun. Apex was bleeding, sure, but so was I. Years of loyalty, trust, identity, all fraying at the edges. This was the crisis I'd built, the peak of the fight I'd chosen. And now, with Lillian's threat hanging like a blade, I had to face it. The bigger pressure wasn't out there. It was in me. The conference room on Pinnacle's 30th floor felt like a pressure cooker as I stood at the head of the table. The late morning light slicing through the floor-to-ceiling windows and casting long, jagged shadows across the steel surface. Raleigh's skyline stretched out beyond the glass, a sprawl of gleaming towers and ambition, but inside the air was thick with the weight of what we'd done, and what was still coming. My new badge dangled from my neck, the Chief Innovation Officer title a quiet anchor amid the storm I'd unleashed. The screens behind me flickered with Pinnacle's logo, a pulsing reminder of the ground I'd claimed, but my eyes were on the team, Ethan, Sarah, Marcus, sitting stiffly in their chairs, their faces a mix of resolve and unease. Tom hovered near the door, arms crossed, his usual grin replaced by a taut line of focus. We just hung up on Lillian Grayson's icy threat, and the silence she'd left behind was louder than her words. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles whitening against the cool metal, and forced my voice steady. All right, let's cut through the noise. Apex is rattled, Lillian's call proves it. They're scrambling, digging for anything to hit us with. But we're not waiting for their move. We've got the patent, we've got Pinnacle, and we've got each other. That's what matters now. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table, his dark eyes locked on mine. She sounded too damn sure of herself, Rachel. Roots in Apex Systems, she said. What if they've got something, some log, some backup we missed? You know how deep their IT goes. The question hit like a jab to the ribs, sharp and precise, because I'd been asking myself the same thing since her voice cut through the speaker. I'd been meticulous, paranoid, even filing the patent upgrades off their servers, scrubbing my tracks, locking it down through a shell LLC no one at Apex could trace. But Ethan was right. Their IT was a labyrinth, a beast I'd helped build. There was a ghost of my work buried in their systems. A draft, a timestamp, they could twist it into a fight. My chest tightened, a flicker of doubt worming through the armor I'd worn all week. Had I misstepped? Left a crack they could pry open? They might, I admitted, my voice low but firm, refusing to let the uncertainty bleed through. But it's a bluff until they prove it. The patent's clean, filed last spring, no Apex fingerprints. If they had something solid, Lillian wouldn't be fishing with threats. She'd be serving papers. Sarah shifted in her seat, her coffee cup tapping a nervous rhythm against the table. Fishing or not, they've got the cash to drag this out. Lawsuits take time, Rachel. Pinnacle's hot now, but what if Victor gets cold feet? We're betting everything on this. Her words stung not because they were wrong, but because they echoed the fear I'd buried under layers of defiance. Victor Lang's handshake had been iron yesterday, his confidence a bulwark I'd leaned on. But Sarah was right. Pinnacle was a business, not a crusade. If Apex tied this up in court, bled us with legal fees and bad press, would he stand by me? Or would I be the liability he cut loose, my team collateral damage? The thought twisted in my gut, a cold spike of vulnerability I hadn't felt since Lillian's first ambush. I straightened, pushing off the table, and paced to the window, needing the space to breathe. The skyline shimmered below, indifferent to the war I'd kicked up, and I pressed a hand against the glass, its chill grounding me. Victor's in, I said, more to myself than them. He saw the patent, signed off on the announcement. He knows the stakes. Apex can throw money at this, but we've got the truth and the momentum. They're the ones bleeding now. Marcus spoke up then, his voice quiet but steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. Stocks down 5 points as of 10 minutes ago. TechCrunch is eating it up, calling it Harper's revenge. Twitter's a mess with Apex hashtags. They're not just bleeding, Rachel. They're hemorrhaging. A flicker of satisfaction sparked in my chest, sharp and fleeting like a match struck in the dark. I turned back to them, catching Ethan's nod, Sarah's hesitant half-smile, Marcus's unflinching stare. Hemorrhaging. Good. Let Jim Carver choke on his Q3 projections. Let Lillian's polished mask crack under the strain. I'd spent 15 years building Apex's empire, and now I was tearing it down with my own hands. The triumph was there, burning bright, but it came with a shadow. The cost, the lives I'd upended, the gray line between justice and vengeance I couldn't quite define. Before I could respond, the door swung open and Victor Lang strode in, his broad frame filling the room with a presence that sucked the air dry. His gray suit was impeccable, but his eyes, those flint-sharp eyes, were stormy, locked on me like a missile finding its target. Tom straightened, stepping aside, and my team went still, the weight of his arrival pressing down on us all. Rachel, Victor said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the steel table. You've got Apex's board in a tailspin. Jim Carver just called me, screaming about injunctions, IP theft, the works. I told him to shove it, but he's not bluffing. Their legal team's filing by end of day. My pulse kicked up, a drumbeat hammering against my ribs, but I held his gaze, refusing to flinch. Let them file, I said, my tone colder than I felt. The patent's mine, filed clean, no overlap with their systems. They've got no case, just noise. Victor studied me, his jaw tightening, and for a moment, I saw the calculation behind those eyes. Weighing me, the patent, the risk I'd dragged to his doorstep. Then he nodded, a sharp, decisive jerk of his head, and the tension in my shoulders eased just a fraction. Good. Our lawyers are ready. Tom's got them briefed. But this isn't just about the law now. It's blood in the water and Carver's desperate. You sure you're ready for this? The question hung there, heavy as the Raleigh sky pressing against the windows. Was I ready? I'd outmaneuvered Apex, pulled Ethan and half my team to Pinnacle, turned their betrayal into my leverage. But Lillian's voice still echoed. Asterisk, you're still playing the small game, asterisk. And now Victor's stare was boring into me, demanding an answer I wasn't sure I had. My hands clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms, and I felt the storm inside me cresting. Anger, pride, fear, all crashing together in a wave I couldn't hold back. I've been ready since they cut me loose, I said, my voice rising raw with the fire I'd kept banked too long. 15 years, Victor. I built their empire, coded the algorithm that kept them afloat, and they thought they could steal it and toss me out like trash. This isn't just a fight, it's mine. And I'm not stopping until they're on their knees. The room went quiet, the weight of my words settling like ash. Ethan's eyes widened, a flash of something fierce mirroring my own, while Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look, shock maybe or recognition. Tom smirked, a quiet damn slipping under his breath, and Victor's lips twitched, not quite a smile but close. He stepped forward, clapping a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and steady. Then let's bury them, he said, his voice a growl of approval. You're not just a hire, Rachel, you're a force. Let your team lock this down. We've got your back. The words hit like a lifeline, pulling me from the edge I'd been teetering on. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and turned to my team. My asterisk team, fully mine now, not Apex's ghosts. Ethan stood first, his chair scraping against the floor, and the others followed, a quiet resolve hardening in their faces. This was it. The peak, the clash, the moment I'd clawed my way toward since Tuesday's ambush. Apex was coming, but so were we. All right, I said, stepping to the screens, my voice steady now, sharp with purpose. Ethan, pull the patent specs. Every detail, every timestamp. Sarah, Marcus, dig into Pinnacle's rollout plan. Tighten it, make it bulletproof. We're not just defending this, we're weaponizing it. Apex wants a war? They've got one. They moved fast, laptops snapping open, fingers flying across keyboards, the hum of focus filling the room. Victor watched for a moment, then left with Tom trailing behind, their voices fading into the hall. Strategy, lawyers, next steps. I stayed at the head of the table, my hands braced against it, the steel cold under my palms. The skyline glittered beyond the glass, a battlefield I'd claimed, but the victory felt fragile. teetering on the edge of what apex might still throw at us. My eyes drifted to Ethan, his head bent over his screen, then to Sarah and Marcus, their quiet intensity a mirror of the fire I'd felt building all week. They'd followed me, left Apex, bet their futures on this gamble, and the weight of that trust pressed against my chest, heavier than the triumph. Satisfaction pulsed through me, yes, seeing them here, my crew intact, my legacy wrested back from Apex's grip. But beneath it, the conflict churned. Had I dragged them into a vendetta dressed up as justice? Was this about protecting my work or punishing the ones who'd betrayed me? The screens flickered, data scrolling fast, and I pushed the doubt down, burying it under the rhythm of the fight. Lillian's threat loomed, Apex's shadow still stretching toward us, but here in this room I felt it, the shift, the tipping point. We were at the crest, the high tide of the war I'd started. And as I watched my team dig in, the city humming below, I knew one thing. I'd chosen this. Win or lose, it was mine. The hum of the Pinnacle conference room faded into a distant buzz as I stood at the head of the table, my hands still braced against the cold steel, watching Ethan, Sarah, and Marcus dive into their work. The screens flickered with data, timestamps, specs, rollout plans, each keystroke a brick in the wall we were building to hold Apex at bay. Raleigh's skyline loomed beyond the glass, a stark silhouette against a sky bruising into dusk, and I felt the weight of the day settle into my bones. We'd drawn blood today. Pinnacle's announcement had gutted Apex's stock, sent Jim Carver into a tailspin, but Lillian's voice still echoed in my skull, that silken threat of an injunction gnawing at the edges of my resolve. The fight wasn't over, not yet, and the air in the room crackled with the unspoken tension of what came next. 2 weeks later, I found myself in Atlanta, standing backstage at the Georgia Tech Convention Center, the murmur of 1,000 voices seeping through the heavy velvet curtain. The Southeast Tech Summit was a beast of an event. Industry titans, venture capitalists, and scrappy startups all packed into a sprawling hall of glass and steel, their chatter a low roar that vibrated through the floor. My keynote was slotted for 3 p.m., a capstone to a conference buzzing with rumors of Apex's collapse and Pinnacle's rise. The air back here smelled of burnt coffee and nervous sweat, the kind of cocktail that clung to high-stakes moments, and I adjusted the mic clip to my blazer, my fingers steady despite the pulse hammering in my throat. I'd spent the morning in a haze of prep calls with Tom and Victor, their voices crackling over the line with updates that hit like adrenaline shots. Apex's stock had cratered, down 18% since Monday, a free fall that had analysts on X screaming black swan event. Jim Carver was scrambling, firing off press releases that blamed unforeseen market shifts, while Apex's legal team filed their injunction, a flimsy Hail Mary that Pinnacle's lawyers had already shredded in a countermotion. Victor Lang, Pinnacle's CEO, had stepped down yesterday, not because of us, Tom insisted, but the timing felt like a domino I'd knocked loose. Retirement, the official statement read, but the whispers said he'd lost faith in Apex's counterpunch and didn't want the stink of their fallout on him. Either way, it left Pinnacle's board leaning harder on me, their new chief innovation officer, to cement this win. The curtain rustled as a stagehand poked his head through, his headset askew. 5 minutes, Ms. Harper, he said, his voice clipped, impatient. I nodded, smoothing my blazer, and caught my reflection in a smudged backstage mirror. Sharp lines, dark hair pulled tight, eyes that burned with something I hadn't seen in months. Triumph, yes, but laced with exhaustion, a weariness that clung like damp cloth. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of board meetings, late-night strategy sessions, and Ethan's team locking down the patent rollout. We'd won, by every metric we'd won. But standing here, the victory felt heavier than I'd expected, weighed down by the cost I couldn't unsee. The lights dimmed beyond the curtain, a hush falling over the crowd as the MC's voice boomed through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rachel Harper, Chief Innovation Officer of Pinnacle Technologies, architect of the algorithm reshaping our industry. Applause erupted, sharp and sudden, and I took a breath, stepping through the curtain into a blinding wash of light. The stage was a stark platform of polished wood, flanked by massive screens flashing Pinnacle's logo in crisp blue. Below me, the audience stretched out, an ocean of suits and lanyards, faces upturned, some curious, some skeptical, all waiting for me to deliver. The Atlanta skyline glittered through the hall's towering windows, a jagged horizon of glass and steel that felt like a mirror to the chaos I'd left behind in Charlotte. I gripped the podium, the cool metal grounding me, and let the noise settle, my eyes scanning the crowd. Somewhere out there were Apex ghosts, former colleagues maybe, or rivals licking their wounds, but I couldn't see them, and that was enough. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the last ripples of applause. 15 years ago, I started coding in a basement office, chasing a hunch about data and markets. Today I'm standing here because of that hunch, and because of a team that believed in it too. I paused, letting the words hang, feeling the weight of Ethan, Sarah, and Marcus back at Pinnacle, their loyalty the spine of this moment. Innovation isn't just about breakthroughs. It's about fighting for what's yours, about standing up when the odds say you should sit down. That's what Pinnacle represents, and that's why I'm here. The screens behind me shifted, displaying a sleek graph of the algorithm's projections, peaks and curves I'd drawn in sleepless nights, now Pinnacle's crown jewel. The crowd murmured, a low hum of awe or calculation, and I leaned into it, my voice rising. This isn't just tech. It's a reckoning for an industry that's too quick to bury the people who build it. I've seen that firsthand. And I've learned that sometimes you don't just walk away. You turn the tables. The words landed hard, a ripple of nods and whispers spreading through the seats. I could feel the tension in my shoulders ease, a slow uncoiling as the room leaned in. This wasn't just a speech. It was a line in the sand, a claim staked after weeks of clawing through Apex's betrayal. The applause swelled again, louder now, and I stepped back from the podium, letting it wash over me. Satisfaction bloomed in my chest. Sharp, real, a warmth I hadn't felt since Ethan and the team signed on, since Pinnacle's announcement turned Apex's smug empire to ash. But as I walked off stage, the lights fading behind me, that warmth curdled into something quieter, heavier. Backstage, the air was cooler, the noise muffled, and I sank onto a folding chair, tugging the mic free. My hands shook slightly, not from nerves but from the release, the sudden stillness after weeks of running on fumes. The keynote had cemented my legacy, sure, but it also closed a door I hadn't realized I'd left cracked open. Apex was done. Jim Carver's scrambling wouldn't save them, Lillian's threats had fizzled into nothing. But the victory didn't erase the years I'd given them, the life I'd poured into a machine that spat me out. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen lighting up with texts. Tom's nailed it, Ethan's saw the stream, proud of you, boss, a dozen others from Pinnacle's brass. But my eyes caught on an older message, one I hadn't answered. Carolyn Bates, Apex HR from last week. Asterisk, Rachel, I know things ended rough. Just wanted to say you were the best of us. Good luck. Asterisk, simple, soft, a lifeline from a world I'd torched. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the reply button, and felt the ache flare up again. The cost of this win, the faces I'd left behind. Not just enemies but friends, colleagues who'd trusted me, who hadn't seen the knife until it was too late. The stagehand poked his head in again, breaking the spell. Car's ready out back, Ms. Harper. You've got a flight in 2 hours. I nodded, pocketing the phone, and stood, smoothing my blazer one last time. The fight was over. Conflict resolved, Apex gutted, my team safe at Pinnacle. But the reflection lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd wanted justice, had chased it with every ounce of fire in me, but the line between that and revenge had blurred into gray, and I'd crossed it without looking back. The ride to the airport was quiet, Atlanta's streets a blur of lights against the dusk. I leaned my head against the window, the glass cool against my temple, and watched the city slip by. The keynote replayed in my mind. Every word, every cheer. But what stuck was the silence after, the space where the anger used to live. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it had softened, replaced by something new. Release maybe, or the faint stir of expectation. Pinnacle was mine now, a fresh slate, and Ethan's team was with me, building something bigger than Apex ever dreamed. As the car pulled up to the terminal, I stepped out into the evening air, crisp and sharp with the promise of rain. My reflection danced in the glass doors. Tired, yes, but taller somehow, unbowed. I'd fought for what was mine, turned the tables, and won. The cost was real. Bridges burned, trust fractured, but so was the gain. Satisfaction settled in, steady and sure, not just for the team at Pinnacle but for me, for the woman who'd climbed from a basement coder to this. I walked inside, my steps firm against the tile, and glanced back at the skyline one last time. Apex was behind me, a ghost fading into the dusk. Ahead was Pinnacle, a future I'd carved with my own hands. And for the first time in weeks I felt the weight lift. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to keep going.